esteemed members of the Chennai Center for China Studies, respected serving officers and veterans of the armed forces, dignitaries from foreign missions in Chennai, friends from the media, students, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. My name is Anantra Rangan and I am a research officer at Chennai Center for China Studies. I deem it my honor and privilege to host this one-day international conference on shaping and synthesizing the voice of Global South post G20 by the Chennai Center for China Studies. Among the audience, we have with us distinguished guests for the inaugural session, namely Your Excellency Tagamo Akasuki, Consul General of Japan in Chennai, Commodore R.S. Vasan, Director General, Chennai Center for China Studies, and the Regional Director of National Maritime Foundation, Tamil Nadu Chapter, and Ambassador Anil Vadva, IFS, retired, former Secretary East, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. I welcome you, sirs. I would like to invite the dignitaries to the dais, please. Now, to commence the one-day international conference, I invite Commodore R.S. Vasan, IN, Director General, C3S, to deliver the welcome address and opening remarks.
Thank you, Anutra. A very good morning to you, all of you, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency, Consul General of Tamil, Ambassador Vadva, and the distinguished members here. Speakers, resource persons who have taken the trouble to come here. We have speakers from Bangladesh, from Sri Lanka. So it's a very interesting day today for all of us. Can the youngsters tell me why? Come on, youngsters. Superstar's birthday. It's Rajinikanth's birthday today. So I would not have been surprised if these guys started dancing here. With that jailer song. So anyway, many happy returns day to him. And coming on a serious note, we've been toying with this idea of hosting this particular conference for more than 7-8 months. As you are aware, India was in the lead position, and we were asked to conduct the entire proceedings of the G20, which was taken very seriously by the government of the day. They had 200 plus road shows in different towns across the country, and this is something that's given us a phenomenal amount of mileage in terms of how India can contribute the process of evolving a consensus amongst the global south. Unfortunately, we've also been challenged by the Russia-Ukraine war, which seems to not end at all. And then we also have now the Gaza challenges, which are there with Hamas and Israel forces in a battle that's causing phenomenal amount of casualties. So it's in this context we're trying to see how we can bring the developed nations and the developing nations together. Not that there's anything new in this effort. It's always been there. It's something that there's been a conscious decision by the developing countries to help out those who are developing. By ODA, where Japan had taken a phenomenal amount of lead in providing this kind of an assistance decades before the so-called BRI was launched. And so that was the kind of a benign investment that was made in Asia, in Africa and other places to help the developing countries achieve their trajectories. So, as far as we are concerned, in the Chennai Center for China Studies, we said we will try and bring these different people from various regions to try and get them together. Initially, we envisaged this to be a bigger event. However, due to various constraints and the weather here, we brought it down to one day. I was going through various documents yesterday, as many of you would have, and the latest document, which is accessible, it's in the open domain. There's nothing new about that. Has highlighted what are the core areas that are required to be followed up post the G20. So the last meeting was held in in a virtual mode towards end of November, And some of the key factors which are there I'll highlight before I hand over to the keynote speakers over here. And what came out in this conference was that there were concerns on ongoing conflicts, the two conflicts that I mentioned. Because this has affected food security, it has affected energy security, it has affected the geopolitics of the region. And so therefore this is a serious concern that has been noticed by these people. A disproportionate use of force. Not just in Gaza, but you also saw in the last week a use of cannons and collision in Philippines. But this is all disproportionate because we are looking at preventing something happening in the maritime domain, not by use of force, but by compliance with the rule-based order, which I'm sure some of the speakers will address. So therefore, I think the emphasis has been in the G20 dialogue, which took place last month, as I said, is an emphasis on returning to dialogue. Come back to the dialogue mode, let's keep talking and let's resolve these issues instead of resorting to use of force. And then, of course, commitment to humanitarian crisis, the crisis to overcome this crisis, what can be done, is something that must be looked at. So I have these 10 commandments which are there, or 10 points which I noted down from this discussions that took place, and all these are important. So I thought I'll spend a little time on this. I'm not going to expand each of these because speakers have enough time, about 20 minutes or so, to expand on some of these sub-themes that are identified. So what has come out is that we need to be able to find just peaceful solutions to disputes. It's not something new. It's always been said, but it never happens because they will always try to resort to use force. One party tries to use force, and therefore there are issues of how to bring this to normalcy. The other thing which has come out clearly is that we need to work in the spirit of equality, mutual respect, and solidarity. We all have heard about the term that was used on innumerable occasions as one family, one earth, and one future. So this is something which should bring the nations together in terms of trying to identify what problems there are and what solutions can be found by working together and not by isolating each other. So the inclusion of the African Union is again a great thing that happened at this G20, because we could not have ignored a continent the size of Africa with the population which is there, and which is what will again help us in redefining the voice of the South. So let me just identify these 10 points that I spoke to you about earlier. So one is fostering human-centric development for our future. So everything is human-centric after all, so it has to be led by humans. And so therefore, people who are involved better would be in a position to help the developing countries to shape their future. Climate action. This is one which, all the countries without exception are agreed that we need to work on this, because we need to be able to help our future generations in coming to terms with climate change, but also have policies which are well implemented to see that, these things don't go out of hand. And the third is on energy transitions. Basically here what we are talking about is affordable, inclusive energy transitions. Which means that, the transition from fossil fuel, we saw last week that, there were secret documents which are leaked to say that we must continue to keep the fossil fuel demands alive, because it's also related to the economy of that region. So, these are the challenges that we have in terms of the transition from the conventional fuel and moving on to green energy, to ammonia, to hydrogen, to EVs, etc. It's happening. It's not that it's not happening. India itself has surpassed some of the targets that it set for himself, and therefore the technology that was found out or invented is something that has to be shared across the board amongst the global south by the developing countries. The fourth point was about delivering and financing for development. There's been a lot of requirement. Obviously, the world requires, the developing countries require something like hundreds of trillions of dollars for development, for infrastructure development, for connectivity, for ports, for airports, for roads, for buildings, everything. So, where is the money going to come from? So, at the geopolitical level, we have discussed the impact of BRI. After all, they had the money and they were able to bring in this money. But we also know what kind of impact there was because of the mode of investment. So, the developmental finance and sharing of these finances is something which is to be at a benign level. The fifth point was about leveraging technological transformation through digital public goods. Here again, I think India has done fairly well for itself. Whether it's the Aadhaar, whether it's the digital payments that we have now resorted to post-COVID, it's phenomenal. The daily transactions, or even for that matter, the transactions every second has surpassed some of the records in the past, even by developed countries. So this is what can be, perhaps shared with other developing countries in the south, where economic transactions are not a hurdle anymore, and there is a commonality in the way we approach digitization of public goods. So this is something that has happened again, and we are very happy with the kind of progress that's been made by India, and also the fact that India is willing to transfer some of these technologies for the common good of the developing countries. That point is about reinvigorating and reforming multilateral system. All of you know that the United Nations Security Council itself is outdated. There is no representative proportional this thing from India and from other countries which are there. So this is something that's been a point of concern. Not that it's been discussed only yesterday, but nothing much has happened in terms of restructuring the United Nations Security, and also many of the UN organizations which require this proportional representation. Women-led development, again, I think the India has done decently well on this. There's plenty of things to do still, but the fact that you have marked 1/3 of the member seats for women, but also in many of our areas, whether education, health, corporate sector, women are taking the lead. So which is a good sign. So women, without women empowerment, societies can hardly succeed. Here's another point, that there's a consciousness amongst all the participating countries. The eighth point is about accelerating the integration of global countries in global value chains. Remember, after the COVID, we all faced these challenges of supply chains. There was dependency on some of the critical items, and there was one country which was squeezing the rest of the world to dictate terms, including for us the API, where we are a major importer of the API in India, and that's what contributed to our vaccine success. So it would not have succeeded if we are not importing these APIs from whichever sources they were. And China was a major source. This is a point that we must understand. And therefore, the initiatives such as the Resilient Supply Chain Initiative, the RSCI, and which has also come out in many other forums. Thanks to COVID, and thanks also to the geopolitical equations that we're developing, we have found many more alternatives to avoiding dependence on one single country. So the ninth point is on sustainable development goals and the 2030 agenda prioritization, which has been agreed by these people who met in end November virtually. And so the 2030 agenda is vital for us. We have another 6-7 years. There are certain targets to be met, and for the global community, the sustainable development goals is something which is linked, which was previously the millennium development goals. So this is again another area which is of importance. The last point which I noted is on strengthening international cooperation and countering terrorism. Now this is again another important dimension of how, in our context, particularly from our Western neighbor, the state-sponsored terrorism is something that hit daily lives. Of course, as they say that some of these things which you start, you may not have any control when it comes back to hit you. So we've seen it happening in Pakistan. But however, the global initiatives that are required for combating terrorism, despite many resolutions, United Nations Security Council resolutions, cooperative mechanisms which exist, still it is something that affects the common man, whether it's in India or Pakistan or China or wherever. The point is that unless all of us are together in our efforts to combat terrorism in an organized manner, with use of technology, with use of collaboration, cooperative mechanisms, exchange of information, you will realize that this is not going to happen. So finally, what we need to look at is that it was emphasized that today's era must not be that of war. That was brought out by our Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, who clearly said that this is not should not be an era of war. Now, how do you make this happen? That's not something that's going to happen overnight. It requires constructive efforts by all the countries But so the relevance of the global south is related to having a common voice and to ensure that the technologies, the expertise that's available in the developed countries is something that's shared and without motives. And only then can we prosper and ensure that the global south prospers just as the rest of the world has prospered by using the environment that was existing. So as far as the C3S is concerned, we are very happy and we heartily welcome the speakers from Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Delhi and other places. So you will have a rich experience today of listening to these people and diverse opinions about how we can shape the voice of the cloud. So our effort is to try and bridge gaps that may be in thinking and practices between the developed countries and the developing countries, and to take this forward and contribute to what India has already done as a lead player in G20, and we'll be handing this over to Brazil, I was told, and therefore when we hand over, they would be very happy to take this forward from there, so that the world is now a better place to live in. So there are also other areas which I think MC will talk to about before introducing the session speakers and chairs. There's also been a lot of emphasis on the maritime domain, in terms of the blue economy initiatives, in terms of what is happening in the Indo-Pacific. We also talk about rule-based order, etc. All this would be issues that are here. I'm very happy that a lot of youngsters who are coming here, many of the civil services aspirants. I want you all to ask a lot of questions, probing questions to the speakers who are here. It's not every day that you are going to get them in person. Therefore, make use of this opportunity to derive knowledge and build your own self. Thank you very much for this opportunity. All the best to all of us. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Commodore, for your warm welcome. Now, I would like to invite His Excellency Taga Makasuki, Consul General of Japan in Chennai, to deliver the inaugural address.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to extend my thanks to Commodore Wassan and to C3S for inviting me this inaugural session of the one-day conference on shaping, synthesizing the voice of Global South. Actually, for last several years, I've attended many symposium seminars, and in that mainly I talked about how that Japan and India that as a special strategic and global partner work together for the free and open Indo-Pacific. So Indo-Pacific thing is for me quite and for government position also quite clear. But the global south, this is comparatively new norms, and so whatever I talk now is that not basically for the government thing, but my private or personal thought or view as a student of international relations, international studies, okay? And the global south, the terms, or it's very much promoted by the Prime Minister Modi during this G20 chair, and of course G7 Japan was is G7 chair, and in that we also refer to G20's initiative, achievement and result, and from that point of view, press, the newspapers always come that global south, but actually still that definition or what global south still not very clear or a kind of consensus or something. It's not like that. It's okay, because when we started talking about Indo-Pacific, that started in 2007 when that Prime Minister Abe spoke in Parliament at the confluence of two seas. That was actually the beginning of the presenting idea of Indo-Pacific. And after that, the country by country, maybe, okay, United States started talking about Indo-Pacific. But that term, notion is that US thinking may be different from Japan's Indo-Pacific. And India also talking about Indo-Pacific, but maybe not necessary, but in the years by years. So a kind of convergence of idea about Indo-Pacific, or we call that free and open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. So the term Global South, since I'm a student of international relation in 80s, at that time that internationally everyone talking about North-South problems. So I understand very well about what the South or North, and try to understand more how we can solve, or how we can do better world to create more equal, or what can I say, mutually beneficial international order or relation of North and South. And this North-South, those days that still Cold War time. So the South world and South is comparative. Then developing countries. So sometimes we didn't use much about the term South, but this time that, as I said, that as a term of Global South. Global South means, I think, the difference between 80s and today is the size, not the size of the area or number of country, but the strength of the people, strength of the economy. For example, according to the World Bank, by 2013, among the developing countries, and of course China and India are expected to be the largest global investors, and developing countries' shares in global investment is projected to the triple. Means in 2000 maybe it's only 1/5, but by 2030 it's 3/5. Actually, I'm talking about investment. Now, long time ago we're talking about investment from north to south, but this shows from south to south, south to south. Oh, I'm not sure who is the south, but importance of global south is as such that if India, I believe India is a core country of global south, and when we talk about centrality of ASEAN in Indo-Pacific, I believe India is a centrality of global south, and thinking about the future of Indian economy, India is one of the largest investors to the world, to the global south. So this is a changing paradigm, and from that point of view, I believe Prime Minister Modi is that initiated or promoted the idea of global south, and how to make this voice of global south to reach to everywhere. Everywhere means that developed countries, those major countries like US or EU. So I think that just this is norms. I try to understand what global south and in that global south what the India can do. Of course, various issues already Commodore Bassan mentioned several very important points. I don't touch upon each of them. Each subject is very, very important. So I believe today's day-long presentation and deliberation and discussion, we can deepen our understanding about what we can cooperate better. As talking about Japan's cooperation with so-called South or developing countries, actually for us, cooperation or engage closely with the South is not a new term. We have been long. For example, in case of Africa, we are hosting TICAD. TICAD is the Tokyo International Conference for African Development. So many years, and we are very good development partner with Africa, and so as we have the mechanism with that Pacific Island countries or Central Asian countries. So there are, as Commodore Tosa mentioned, several multilateral schemes also there. Of course, our cooperation basically bilateral, but through the multilateral and organization, we are doing certain engagement and cooperation with those countries or those areas in the South. So, and in that context, actually I'm very happy to mention Japan has been cooperating with India. Of course, Japan is a very good development partner of India for India's development, but we are cooperating for the third countries. We have scheme through JICA, the technical assistant program to train the expert and those professional people in a training course, which before we used to invite those people from the developing country to Japan and many people have already, but we have a scheme to do it in a third country. Third country means, for example, in India, and invite those from other third country, from Africa or Middle East or Latin America, and do the training with from Japanese side also sending the experts from Japan to. So this kind of cooperation we are doing, and we have been doing. So, and in the coming years, of course, definitely importance of global South increase, and those relation not only between global South and the developed countries, but among that the countries in global South, I believe that Japan can cooperate very closely with India to achieve or various objective, or if that already Commodore Bassan mentioned so many fields which we have to do a good job. So I hope once again today's symposium will put as very meaningful and important input to consider or to do for our better future. Thank you very much again for inviting me to this inaugural session.
Thank you, His Excellency. I now invite Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, IFS, former Secretary East, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be back here at C3 and have been associated with this very important think tank in the past as well. It's always a great pleasure. Thank you, Commodore Vasan, for inviting me again. Thank you to your colleagues once again for coordinating this. Everyone in the audience. Last night I was thinking about the topic in greater detail. Just like Masayoshi-san, I was a little confused about what I'm supposed to focus upon. But then I realized that it's about Global South post the G20. So you narrowed down the scope a lot and makes it that much easier to speak about the Global South and what has happened in the G20 and what we're supposed to do thereafter. So I'll start by saying that traditionally India has been a very keen participant in both the non-aligned movement and the G77 and has always seen itself as an important pillar of the Global South. I'm not going to go into semantics about what Global South is. Just 2 days ago I read a very erudite article by Professor Rajamohan in Foreign Policy. Those of you who have not seen it, please do read it online. It's available, where he actually questions the whole concept of the Global South, because what he says is that we don't know what exactly the Global South is in today's context. But all of us sitting here in India understand perfectly well what it means. And when I elaborate on this, you'll come to realize why we do so. The G20 summit, which happened under India's presidency in 2023, will be remembered for shaping of the G20 as a much more dynamic platform, I would say, and for putting the so-called Global South squarely at the center of the global governance agenda. That was the issue here. So in the process, the Global South also, I think, underscored its own credentials as a player which is willing and is able to shape global outcomes rather than being a passive recipient of decisions which are taken by others. Because India organized two very important Voice of the Global South summits, and I think all of you must have followed that. One was on 12 to 13 January and the other on 17 November 2023. So one prior to actually launching all those number of meetings here on the G20, and the one which followed it up after the G20. And therefore, I think India managed to live up to its role not only as a responsible global stakeholder, but as a supporter of the Global South. Now, soon after that, there was an announcement to convene another summit to discuss issues related to artificial intelligence and its impact on the Global South. And that's also clearly indicative of the creation of a new institutional platform, in my view, for sustaining solidarity with the developing world. In fact, the opportunity to host the G20 summit was actually a trigger for India to try and bring the Global South into the limelight. Now, over the years, India has become, I don't know how many of you realize this, but conscious of the reduced relevance of the non-aligned movement in the post-Cold War era. Also, there's a little bit of disenchantment with the non-performance of the G77 as a whole, because they've not been pulling their weight together as they used to in the past, for various reasons. So lately, India has been following a policy of what we call strategic autonomy. Quite recently, that term was made famous by our last Foreign Secretary, Vijay Gokhale, but never gave up actually the cause of the Global South. And therefore, after the G20 summit, India has created, I think, a new innovative pathway which is suitable for the needs of the 21st century. This is designed to help the Global South address current geopolitical and economic challenges much more effectively. So the simple purpose of the Voice of the Global South Summit was to ascertain the key concerns and needs that the developing countries have, so that this could be taken up and pursued by the G20 presidency during India's tenure from December 2022 to November of 2023. So the inclusive programs and the opportunity for 125 countries to articulate their views I think received considerable appreciation. I could sense that happening sitting in Delhi. The most tangible outcome was that India as a host obtained very rich inputs that later molded the G20 agenda. Now the G20 summit and the consensus on a New Delhi declaration reminded us that there is a world beyond the major powers which is also seeking a role in global decision making. With changes of sustainable development, inclusive growth, climate change, food security, the digital divide, emerging tech regulation, the multilateral development bank reform, all these cannot be undertaken without the developing world at the table. Then there was the inclusion of the African Union in the G20, and that has fundamentally, in my view, altered the character of this platform, making it more inclusive and representative of the emerging global order. So from an African perspective, the double standards of organizations, if I would say G20 and G7 are legion, including rhetoric on vaccines, on debt sustainability, development finance, which has not been matched by actual implementation on the ground. So for the global south, where demands for global support to overcome poverty, fragility, and catastrophes are the highest, the possibilities of G20 driven benefits are always going to depend on the leverage which is exerted by emerging economies within the global south, like India. And it is in this context that the priority issues and targets from the summit in India, the needs of more inclusive growth, accelerated implementation of sustainable development goals, accelerated action to mitigate climate change adversities, health emergencies, debt vulnerabilities, reform of multilateral development banks, and strengthening more equitable multilateral bodies. Many of these were referred to by Commodore Vasan, and these are just some examples. These are all indications to show that increased participation and voice of the global south can change the agenda of global action and partnership. The second Voice of the Global South Summit in India in November, that focused on the global south getting together for one future. And in fact, that was the name of the theme session, which was the concluding session. So the essential purpose here was twofold. One is to apprise the representatives of the global south of the deliberations and outcomes of the G20 summit, and to ensure that that momentum is maintained and sustained with the support of developing countries for an optimal implementation of the G20 decision. Not everything can be implemented, but I'm very sure that after this there will be much more interest from those who participated in these meetings to take some interest in making sure that something gets done in the future. India also inaugurated the Global South Center for Excellences called Dakshin, acronym for Development and Knowledge Sharing Initiative. This will serve as a think tank and a repository of knowledge and development initiatives that promote greater collaboration among developing nations. Ministerial sessions actually went into a whole gamut of India's G20 priorities, and those ranged from sustainable development goals to energy transition, the climate action, finance, digital transformation, debt relief, women and development, counter-terrorism, and reform of the Security Council. So the admission of AU and the role of India, I think, was very widely appreciated here. In sum, there were three important takeaways at the second Voice of the Global South Summit. First, the Global South orientation of the G20 summit was of course fully noted, because over 50% of the content of the G20 New Delhi Leaders Declaration is related exclusively to the needs of the Global South. Second, there was recognition that the success in securing a seat for the African Union in G20 demonstrated that global groupings can be persuaded to respond to the changing global realities in an inclusive fashion. And third, that resolving global challenges required not confrontation, which has been the case so far, but a mix of cooperation, consultation, and coordination. Now, unless that happens, it's always be seen as a north-south divide, as a divide between those who have and those who do not have. Now, how do you bridge that is a very important question. The mission to further the cause of the global south, however, has a very long road ahead. This mission will be fully accomplished when the implementation of the G20 decisions gets underway and then it picks up momentum. For this, the global south nations have to keep their collective voices very robust. The rise and the voice of the global south is in fact becoming quite strident. Brazil is hosting the 2024 G20 Plus Summit, South Africa the year after, and even though the global south is not united on most matters, we all know that, its countries do nurse a very deepening kind of frustration with the current system which always keeps them down. So that is the driving force behind this. India today is keen to provide solutions to global challenges, announcing plans for a global biofuels alliance and India-Middle East-Europe connectivity partnership, as well as its willingness to share its own success in digital public infrastructure. The current international financial institutions will need to be restructured to conform to the new realities of climate change and bring in new instruments like blended finance, like guarantees and credit enhancement to allow capital, private capital to flow into the global south. So India will have to work with the global south countries to ensure free trade and resist protectionism. Climate change actions will require climate finance, which is critical along with an energy transition. And that, of course, is something which again requires financing. Regionally, India has renewed its focus on the 14-member FIPIC. This is the Forum for India-Pacific Islands Cooperation, which was launched in 2014. And at the last FIPIC summit, which was held in Port Moresby, India promised several bilateral projects. And these are in the fields of IT, healthcare, climate change, food supply, medicines, amongst others. There was a 12-point program which was unveiled, and that includes the promise to build a hospital, extend scholarships, dialysis centers, and subsidized medicines. India has continued its development cooperation with countries of the ASEAN, as you know, in diverse fields through a bilateral cooperation fund, a science and technology fund, and a green fund. And it has also extended a $1 billion line of credit for connectivity projects. That includes digital connectivity as well. In Africa, India has positioned itself as a partner in development because it has extended concessional loans of over $12.3 billion. It's allocated $700 million in grant assistance. Its capacity building initiatives there are focused on skills, on technology, and on knowledge transfer. Over half of the India-led International Solar Alliance members are from Africa. In the 2022-23 budget, India had allocated 45 lines of credit, and that is worth $14.5 billion, covering 263 projects to 7 countries in India's neighborhood, and that includes Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Maldives, Mauritius, and Seychelles. And the projects cover sectors like roads, railways, power, ports and shipping, telecom, health, education, and aviation. Now, India is also part of the Quad, which you all know, which has taken several initiatives for development cooperation. That's part of Quad that many not talk about. In climate change, in new and emerging technologies, in vaccine and health, and is now seen as an enabler to harmonize the domestic structural reforms with a secure and enabling external environment of trade, investment, technology, and capital flows. So for India, the next challenge as a co-traveler, I would call the Global South, is to ensure maximum coordination with Brazil and South Africa as the next 2 presidents of the G20. Because it is only through close engagement and while respecting the sensitivities of G20 successors, that India can continue serving the cause of Global South constructively. And this is only apt because the pace of our own growth in order to achieve the dream of a developed India by 2047 rests a lot on this cooperation with the Global South. Let me end there. Thank you very much.
I thank Ambassador for his address, which has set the tone for the rest of this conference. I now request Commodore to felicitate the dignitaries. I would like to invite Ms. Madhumata Raguraman, Research Officer at C3S, to deliver the vote of thanks for the inaugural session.
Good morning. On behalf of the entire team of C3S, I would like to take this opportunity to propose the vote of thanks. At the outset, we extend our sincere thanks to our distinguished guest, His Excellency Tagamasa Yuki. Sir, thank you so much for coming. He's the Consul General of Japan in Chennai, and I would next also like to extend our thanks to Ambassador Anil Vadwa, the former Secretary East from the Ministry of External Affairs from the Government of India. Thank you so much, sir. Both your speeches really set the tone for the conference. We also extend our thanks to all the distinguished speakers who have readily agreed to join us for this conference and who are present here today. Thank you so much for all your cooperation. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the audience that joined us today. Sincere thanks to all our distinguished members, or those of you who were able to make it, thank you so much. Serving officers from the armed forces, veterans and members from the foreign mission. Thank you very much for coming. A big thanks to all the students who have joined us in huge numbers. So thank you so much for joining us on a weekday as well. We hope this conference will help you in expanding your knowledge on the Global South. Last but not the least, I take this opportunity to thank Team C3S, Commodore R.S. Vasan, sir, Director General, for encouraging the team and providing us with all the help that we needed. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you to my colleagues, Ms. Anutra and Shruti and Ms. Sapna Abraham. We hope you enjoy the conference. Thank you so much.
With the inaugural session coming to an end, we can disperse for high tea and get back to our seats at 10 a.m. Refreshments will be served behind. We also urge all the dignitaries and participants to look after their belongings and kindly inform you that the organizers would not take any responsibility for any loss or damage to the same. The chair for the first session would be Commodore R.S. Vasan, I retired Director General for C3S and Regional Director, National Maritime Foundation, Tamil Nadu Chapter. Commodore Vasan has a distinguished service of 34 years in the Navy and the Coast Guard. His appointments include command of warships, 2 major air stations and a maritime air squadron. He has participated both in 1971 war and IPKF operations. He has also served in many think tanks including the Observer Research Foundation, where he steered the Maritime Security Program, and the Center for Asia Studies as Head of Strategy and Security Studies. I would like to welcome you, sir, to the dais, please. We also have a stellar lineup of speakers for this session, namely Mr. Sridhar Krishnaswamy, Editor-in-Chief, New India Abroad, and Dr. Nandakishore MS, Associate Professor, Department of Politics and International Studies, Pondicherry University. Now, I would like to invite Commodore Vasan to deliver the chair's remarks and introduce the paper presenters.
Thank you, Anu, and welcome you all for this first session. I'm sure that with the kind of expertise that we have here with the panelists, we will have a very interesting session. like I said in the morning, all of you who are here, particularly the students, the young lot, make it a point to ask a lot of questions, because it's not every day that you get this opportunity where you have experts coming from all over. We have Nanda Kishore, who has come from Pondicherry. We have Sridhar Swami, who is a global experience. He's also been into journalism, history writing. So these are the kind of people who are going to talk to us on the first session, the theme of which is about diplomacy and security. Now you must be wondering as to what is the relevance of diplomacy and security to the global south. As was highlighted by both His Excellency Consul General of Japan and Ambassador Wadhwa, what came out clearly is that unless there is a phenomenal amount of dialogue that's taking place, we will not be able to bridge this gap between the developed and the developing. So there are also some, not actually questions, but to say that what is this global south all about? How do you define global south? What is this thing about bridging the gap? So in simple terms, it's the question of what we can do with the haves and the have-nots. So somebody has it, somebody does not have it. So how can you make them share these assets or whatever you want to call them? So the very first speaker for this session, who has 20 minutes, is our own Mr. Sridhar Swami, and we'll talk about diplomacy and international security, evolving relations with the global south. So even during the Galwan and during Doklam, what we realized was that there was continuous dialogue between the concerned ministries, and the phenomenal amount of dialogue is what is required, whether through institutional mechanisms such as the United Nations, or through track 2 mechanisms which are there, or through any other institutionalized or even informal groupings. But this is something where the whole idea is to keep this dialogue going so that it will get to situations such as we have witnessed in Ukraine and also in Gaza. With that, over to you, Professor Swami.
A very good morning to all of you. It's very great to be in such an august gathering. After hearing Ambassador Taga Masayuki and Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, I think it would be better if I just get away from the podium, because there's not much that I may have to add to what has already been said, and including the introductory remarks by my good friend Commodore Vasan. But anyway, since I have agreed to speak and share some of my views, which as a journalist we are never scared of hiding. There's one thing, there's one thing too good about living in India is that it's a free country. You can say what you want and then face the consequences later. But I had the good fortune of working for institutions that believed in freedom of expression. I never cared to hide anything I had to say. So that said, Global South, is as if we didn't have enough things to worry about in academia and politics. We have added another dimension. Global South is something that nobody is even sure of, as the previous speakers had said. And in diplomacy and in academics, we always wrestle with these things. How do we define? And believe me, many things in international relations don't make sense. Don't make sense at all. But still we continue to debate them, we continue to talk about them. And many of you UPSC aspirants, you will write about it to questions that the question paper setter himself has no clue about. And then he'll be asked to provide an answer key. Okay. So this is the dilemma that faces almost everybody. including diplomats who are supposed to deal and sort out contentious disputes. Like for example, we had the non-aligned movement. Non-aligned. We used to say in Tamil, very non-aligned. I am aligned. That's the non-aligned. And then we have G7, G8, G20. We have ASEAN. We have the OPEC. We have the APEC. We have an APEC. We have an Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, in which India is not a member. Asia Pacific, no India. Right? We are only having observer status there, I think. I don't think in the last meeting also that recently concluded we were offered, but that's okay. We are not cribbing about it. But still, the global South is a concept that is attracting a lot of attention because we have somehow moved away from the north to south debate. Nobody talks about the global north, but it was there. Developed countries made up the north. An assorted group of about 25-30 countries in North America, Europe. And today, there is every possibility of countries like China and India also joining the north because of our accelerating levels of development. I remember when I was in Washington covering the World Bank and IMF, many African delegates used to ask the World Bank, why are you giving money to India? They are almost a developed country. Why is their portfolio so huge and that of Africa very small? And then the World Bank fellow used to say, man, we need to have a portfolio with countries that mean business when it comes to development. And we can't sink money just for the sake of sinking funds in. So it was really frustrating for those people to even understand where the developed institutions were coming from. And then the World Bank itself was, scratching its head many times. Because the global north, at the time of IDA, they used to be very generous in committing money. You have to be very careful. People commit money, but they don't deliver the commitment. So every IDA, the World Bank will say, this year, developed countries, OECD, Europe, they all have given us $15 billion. And then halfway through the financial year, they'll come back and say, my God, countries have not lived up to their commitments, so our IDA is only $7 billion or $8 billion. So, here we are talking about the need. Previously, we used to call them as the underdeveloping, developing, least developed, non-developed. We have moved away. Now we are combining all these things under one heading, Global South. And for which a lot of countries like Japan are very, very actively energetic about engaging in a dialogue with this group of countries. Diplomacy means only one thing, talking. It's better to talk than to fight. But see what is happening in the Ukraine. See, I don't want us to leave this seminar with the impression that the global South is some kind of a monolithic block. It's not. It is as diverse as you can imagine. Everybody is lumped into this grouping. And everybody is urging India to take the lead in being the spokesperson of this evolving concept, which is not a very easy task for India. It's not. As we ourselves found out, when we talked about the Ukraine conflict that started nearly 2 years ago, February 2022, I think it started. And the people keep counting. Today is day 655, 656. And we abstained from several votes at the Security Council. But for a reason we did. So there are divisions, even within the global South, that requires more than just ordinary diplomacy. It requires some heft. It requires a lot of patience. Take a look at what is happening in the Gaza today. Atrocious for the Hamas to have embarked on a terror attack against Israel on October 7th. Almost coinciding with another anniversary, the Yom Kippur conflict. And then the Israeli response, and somebody talked about proportionality. If at all there is one word that has lost its relevance in international relations and international law, it is that sense of proportionality. Nobody, if you give a guy a punch, the other fellow is not going to be content with giving you only one punch. He wants to make sure he floors you so that you don't get up. And that is exactly what is happening in the Gaza today. Till today, this morning I read somewhere, 18,000 civilians have been killed in the bombings of the Gaza Strip. 18,000. And this is not counting still the hundreds who are probably inside the rubble who are yet to be pulled out. So when the dust settles, if at all it does, in the near future, we are going to have many, many more. But still, in the global South, the global South itself is divided. It's not, they are not vocally divided. Everybody gives, there are two things very good in international relations, crocodile tears and lip service. They shed a lot of crocodile tears and they keep talking, lip service. They all condemn just so that the media can carry it. But when you ask them to act, nobody will. Nobody will. Or very few will. And everybody, including in the global South, they were appalled when they saw a so-called switch in India's foreign policy vis-a-vis the Palestine. There was no switch at all. You go back and read what Mr. I am not, believe me, please don't mistake me, I don't belong to any political party. I don't. Go back and read what Mr. Modi said on October 7th. He condemned the terror attack. He condemned the terror. I think every meaningful person will condemn the terror attack. Now you can give all kinds of explanations as to why they did. That's all beside the point. It was a terror attack. And we condemned it. That didn't mean that we have written off the Palestine. We never said anywhere in the statement that this is a shift in our Palestine. We always believed in the statehood for the Palestinians. But you see, this is what, including many people in the globals, they probably did not get up and issue statements condemning India, but privately they would have. Many people have. Many people in India voiced displeasure at the so-called shift away in Indian foreign policy. But that's what it is. The global South, first off, it comprises every part of the world. Asia, Africa, Latin America, everywhere you have countries. And don't forget, we have 193 countries today. And then if you include the territories and the islets, it comes to about 204 or something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong. And out of which there are about 125 countries or 130 countries that belong to the global South. If you are to take the definition of the global South as everybody who does not belong to the global North. But that's how it is. It's a very loose definition. But it also raises a lot of challenges for a country like India. How are we going to lead? First of all, do we want to lead? Do we want to be the leader? First question. Second question, will others allow India to lead? When others will allow India. See, when people were coining the word Indo-Pacific, the Chinese till today, they call it as the Asia-Pacific. They don't want anything to do with anything called Indo-India, nothing. Why don't you want to call it Indo-Pacific? No, let's call it Asia-Pacific. Even today, you see the Chinese, spokespersons. They always refer to that part of the world as Asia-Pacific, not once as Indo-Pacific. Not once. But still, we cannot look at the global South as a hard and fast divide with the North, because the global South acts in tandem with the North for many, many reasons. Political, economic, strategic, trade, investment, maritime, policing, anti-piracy. We do. The Quad is a classic example. India being in partnership, I won't call it alliance. India with Japan, Australia and the United States. But each country has its own agenda in that. Each country. We use the Quad to further the broader aspirations of the Indo-Pacific. And one of those broader aspirations is staying within the accepted norms of international behavior, or as what Commodore Vasan said, rules-based order. But if you talk to the Chinese about the rules-based order, they will say, whose rules-based order? Rules written by whom? So straight away for everything we are enmeshed in something called divisiveness. And the only way out of and I am sure Ambassador Varga has got rich experience in this. At every summit meeting, the hardest task is to put together a joint statement. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. Many times in international organizations, as a journalist, I have seen countries insist that when you draft the joint statement, there must be at least one Indian in it amongst the officials, because we are very good at it. We are very good not in confusing people, but we are very good in factoring in the various and at times the competitive aspirations and agendas that people bring to the table. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to Um, I just want to end by saying that we are still at the beginning stages of this. It will take a long, long time before we even come to a very clear understanding as to what the global south is, what it is not, and what the parameters of this global south is going to be. Thank you very much, and I look forward to all your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sridhar. I think it's the best way to start the session, where you raised a lot of questions, and I also brought out the inescapable need for dialogue. So that's something that people understand, but it is difficult to, like we said, prepare a joint statement. So in many of these cases, the challenge has been to come to a consensus, which is based on dialogue. Thereafter, to put it down in writing, because thereafter it will be quoted. So people don't want to be quoted about what their views are, what their perceptions were. So you also have given examples on many forums which are there, and including the APEC which you quoted, where India is not a member. So does it bring down the relevance of India in such matters? So there are politics, there is geopolitics at play, there is geoeconomics at play, and I'm sure the youngsters will have many questions for you. But thank you for that excellent exposition, which comes from decades of experience and expertise in journalism and in teaching. Thank you so much. Now with that, we'll move on to another point which you also mentioned. This is about rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific. Whose rules? Who's following? Why is he not following? These are questions which are there in the Indo-Pacific, promoting peace and security between nations of the global south. With that, we have a highly eminent speaker, Dr. Nandakishore. I've known him for decades again, so very happy that we have you here. So just to contextualize his talk, I know he's going to make a presentation. I'd just like to take on from where Professor Sridhar asked this question about whose rules, who is following it and why are they not following, etc. So at least in the case of China, in the maritime domain, we are just asking them to follow UNCLOS, the United Nations Conventions on Laws of the Seas. If you are a signatory, you also ratified it just as India does, then what is your need for violating this? Whether it is a case of use of force against the Philippine fishing vessels, whether it is non-recognition of the PCA verdict that was given in 2016. So these are laws that you signed for, right? And so at the end of it, you say, I don't comply with this. So that is the question. That is the rule-based order that we are talking about. Likewise, it's not just limited to the maritime domain. Look at the WTO provisions. Look at many other international institutions of which China is a member. In every case, it's violated. Those are the rules that we are saying are violated. Why are you violating them? But who's going to bring them back to senses? In case of violations in the Indo-Pacific, are you going to get a UN peacekeeping force to come there with ships, with blue flags and blue berets, and to say, I'm going to enforce peace and tranquility in the Indo-Pacific? So there are serious connotations there, where might is right, and therefore these are the contours that Dr. Nandakishore will cover. Nandakishore, you have 20 minutes, and these youngsters will want you 5 minutes before the session.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here. As Sir mentioned, I've known him for decades, since my early part of the career. In fact, it's he who brought in an amount of discipline and also someone who mentioned, even after being away from the service, even a smallest college would call him to deliver a lecture. He would come up with a PowerPoint presentation to make an impact on the students. That's exactly from where I started off. And as I was also told that good number of students would be coming, I thought I'll make a presentation so that it's much easier for them to follow, and also it gives them pointers to take back so that they can ponder over. At the very outset, let me take this opportunity to congratulate Chennai Center for China Studies, because perhaps this is a culture rarely observed in this part of the country as well as in our own country, unlike the United States. In the United States, the president or anyone in the helm of affair makes a statement or comes up with a new concept. All the think tanks in the United States bombard us with policy papers, conferences, and continuously. You can remember how it happened with Asia Pivot. You can remember how Indo-Pacific happened, and so many other things. And that's where perhaps I request all of you to join me in congratulating Chennai Center for China Studies, being the first one in this country after Dakshin has been spoken by the Prime Minister, and this is the first conference that's happening. And that's a sort of initiative incidentally happening from the south part of this country about the South-South cooperation, or the global South itself is incidental, and also it demands a worthy mention. Now, having said that, the topic that's given to me is on the rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific, but largely the thought was to talk on the promoting peace and security between the nations in the global South. Now, saying that, is the presentation up? Fine, I will be speaking about, initially just talking about a bit on the rule-based international order. It generally comes in as a very cynical component, like the way my predecessor also asked about what exactly is this, whose rules and who makes these rules. In fact, if any country is asking for any sort of compliance in international order, that means they are already talking about some existing rule or some existing order. Otherwise, it will be the real term anarchy that we are talking about. Already we speak in international relations, there exists an anarchy, which simply means we don't have a central authority to control us or central authority to regulate us, but at the same time is not the absolute anarchy that we talk from the hermeneutics perspective, where it is absolute chaotic. That's not the perspective we bring in. We're asking for ceasefire in the Gaza. It essentially means that why should anybody listen to that one? That means there exists an order, there exists some sort of a rules, there exists some sort of an understanding because of which we are all staying here. Otherwise it would take us back to the state of nature. Each nation would kill each other and then perhaps take over. That would be the sort of scenario that we are looking at. So a bit on the principles of the rule-based international order, then building consciousness that is very much required in the global South, challenges and considerations, and some implementation component from the diplomacy perspective. Now, the concept of rule-based international order itself refers to where the countries in any part of the region or in the whole adhere to some agreed upon rules. When we say agreed upon rules, it can even start off with what we call as the Magna Carta to the Westphalian system of 1948, or whatever we conferred ourselves in the post world wars that we saw. Now, that does not mean that there are only rules that have emerged just out of the blue. These have also emerged out of the norms, they've emerged out of certain principles of engagement to a lot of other things, that somehow we have found an amount of civility which is being seen here as well. Now, developing consciousness around such a system, because without that profound consciousness, perhaps countries would not be able to do their business day to day. And this is there where I say that involves promoting and strengthening the idea of adherence to rules and norms, which is essential for regional stability, economic growth, and peaceful resolution of disputes. For sure, without having outputs and outcomes, without tangible outcomes, there would not be any engagement that is worthy of mentioning or that's worthy of taking it forward. Now, when I say principles of a rule-based international order, first and foremost, there are already something that he mentioned, I don't want to be repetitive, that's associated with, let's say, international law and treaties. All of us have been in one or the other way being part of one of such or many such movements and many other things. And the freedom of navigation, which is essential, which is the one which has been spoken so much about, which is also creating an issue. Respecting sovereignty, that's been a bone of contention. We saw Russia-Ukraine war, we have seen many other ones. Invariably, all of them have been having one or the other sort of issue. Economic integration, perhaps it's here that most of the problems arise, but there is also a solution here. Though a lot of neoliberal scholars would want to talk about saying that alone is the way to go ahead with, perhaps that's not so, but it also does a lot of groundwork that is much more important for what we are talking about here. Third is environmental sustainability. That's where one is expected to incorporate environmental protection into the regional order. There was a point of time, as we know, international system has norm givers and norm takers. And norm givers always pushed on us what way they felt, they being recipients of the industrial revolution to everything, that they became already the developing nations or developed nations, and then not even allowing the other nations to catch up and become developed countries, and then subsequently utilize whatever that is possible and then look for economic integration. But countries like India, which embraced globalization much later, had a bit of resistance in the language that Commodore Watson spoke about, the haves and the have-nots, are trying to catch up with the trend and many other things. By then, they saw this was some sort of a Eurocentric terminology coming in, or something that is like an imposition from the West to what we call as climate change or environmental security. We had an amount of resistance there, where India was called as a reluctant power. India was also called as a reluctant philanthropist. We are ready to do something, but at the same time we are resisting to certain changes that were coming in. That behavior changed since 2014, once we got involved in 2016 in the Paris Agreement. That's where you see a normative change coming into India's behavior. India ready to accept leadership position, because when you want to be a leader, you need to also accept certain risks and responsibilities, because visibility is also vulnerability. You cannot always protect yourself and yet anticipate to be a part. And here where India, I think, has arrived at that sort of a position where it is ready to take up shocks, it is ready to take a burden, it is ready to take up responsibility. And India accepted this, saying not anymore the issue between the developed and the developing, but rather it is about everyone. Bangladesh doesn't itself, if you look at its carbon footprint, it's very minimal. It doesn't abuse all the resources or anything of that sort. But China and India being there, directly affecting Bangladesh. Now what Bangladesh has done, that's the crucial reality that we see when it comes to environmental security or climate change, for which all of us have to feel responsible, and more so the global south has to be like the realists, where the self-help is very important, survival becomes primordial. Diplomatic engagements, again, when we say building consciousness, if that is about the rule-based that I spoke in the previous one, the building conscious component requires diplomatic engagements, where we need to foster dialogues and diplomatic initiatives to promote understanding. Now this need not be always track 1, it can be track 1.5, track 2.0. I think without the involvement of the civil society, building consciousness is not a possibility. It's like that of intelligence, where we expect everything to be done by either IB, RAW, or for that matter NTRO. All these are responsible agencies, no doubt about it. The first line of intelligence is always the civil society. Without the cooperation of the civil society, this cannot happen. So at all levels, when I say diplomatic, it also includes people at the civil society level. So track 1, track 1.5 and track 2, all of them have to be, because the direction is given in track 1. They would talk about what rule-based order that we're talking about, what level of engagement that the countries can engage in, and what is possibility and what is not possibility. And at next stages that we see the civil society and others actually engaging in, like the way we are doing here today. Public awareness and education, this plays an extremely important role. Without this, and this exercise is also that sort of an exercise to percolate the very idea of what is global south. It allows us to engage in what is a possibility and what is not a possibility. Without that, perhaps even the questions on what rule based, because all of your engagement as students can stop at the very question saying that whose rules, and then you did not engage at all. If you need to go beyond, then perhaps engage in many other things to look at if there is a possibility to engage, and how do we engage with that one. That would be a much better way of doing things, and that's exactly what can be done through public awareness and education. Institutional frameworks, I think the global south has to buckle up. Global south has to also see to it that we are not always dependent on looking up to the north or looking up to exchanges between the educational institutions to many other things only there. I think the global south itself can engage, because we also have nations that are comparatively doing better, and they have their capacity building at a different level, and that includes India as well, where we are able to contribute to many other things. So I think the whole of Indo-Pacific region can actually look at this one. But the crunch here, or the crux of the story here, is that just because you're part of the global south, you have a leverage to say certain things that I am poor, or I am still underdeveloped, or I am developing. That does not give you leverage to move away from the rule-based order. Rule-based order would be the bedrock of everything, and based on that or staying on that one, rest of the things have to be built upon. The next component is conflict prevention and resolution. I think the whole of the Indo-Pacific or in the global south itself, there are so many hotspots, there are so many differences that we have in and around with all the nations. I think without establishing mechanisms and early warning and preventive diplomacy to address potential conflicts, there's no possibility to stop them. Because in the escalation ladder, we have seen how it starts with asymmetry, subsequently moves to subconventional, then conventional, and the nuclear. At least the nuclear part is comparatively taken care of. The first two, that is the asymmetry and the subconventional, if those two can be arrested, the global south would be able to do much better. Because the moment we allow escalation to happen, there is no cooperation, there is no possibility, there is no engagement at all. Maybe we even push ourselves to a situation like that of what we are doing with Pakistan. We are just not going to engage with them at all. And that's also not in the health or good health of the global south itself. That's why supporting certain regional conflict resolution initiatives is very important. There are global problems and global solutions, regional problems and regional solutions, global problems and regional solutions as well. There can be several permutations and combinations that can work, which might be very sensitive to a particular region. Without that sensitivity being addressed in the global south, we will not be able to go forward. And then it's capacity building, where providing assistance and supporting capacity building. We have done this because without institutions, even theorizing or even trying to talk much about institutions such as democracies will be very difficult. There where we have been helping out countries like Bhutan and many others who have just taken steps. India resists in terms of exporting democracy, which is not fondly spoken about. But at the same time, those of them who are making their own effort, India has been in the forefront to help them out in whatever way it has to be. Because it is precisely here the democracy becomes an abstract component until and unless it is backed up by institutions. It's institutions that make democracy to work, not just the utterance. If just the utterance, then we will have a Libya, we will have a Iraq, or we will have some other country which are still struggling and they are unable to come in. So for there, we require the idea of governance that has to be very clearly spoken about through capacity building, as well as education, legal frameworks, and then maritime security anyway for the prosperity of the region is much more important. But needless to say, with all these things, the global south itself suffers from certain difficulties, and these challenges and contradictions have to be overcome. Some of the challenges I've tried listing here, there is great power dynamics. How much ever we talk about global south, how much ever we talk about having our own ways of dealing with things, there's one major problem that I see here is that we resist, we try to keep them out and all this thing. It is not a possibility. The great power dynamics will continue to be here, and their presence is also not, in fact, if you look in, the discourse on Indo-Pacific took off in such speed, within no time United States declared itself as an Indo-Pacific power. They also started a command. Immediately there were changing the nomenclature to everything, and it claimed itself to be a resident power. That's a sort of fluidity that we find in a superpower or in other major powers who have so much of interest to come to all these regions. So invariably their influence will be there. Great power dynamics will move the behavior of some of the states, and even with those, how else perhaps nations have to talk about. That's going to be a great contradiction. That's going to be a greater challenge that we have to live with. Just because we say one day or a few days global south and we have meetings, that does not mean we'll be able to move away from there. Adaptability, diversity of perspective have to be given a space and scope to be considered. Without that one, without those sensibilities, will not be able to take care of it. That's one of the major challenges that we will find each of the countries, even though they're grouped, let's say something like ASEAN, they have their own sensibilities. It's going to be a major case of concern where they'll not be able to move beyond adaptability and consensus building. Now, consensus building is a long-term process. It's like that of, let's say, empowerment. Empowerment doesn't happen overnight. In the same way, consensus building also happens over a period of time. It takes its own time to deliver what it is supposed to deliver. Till then, one has to continuously engage whatever the forums are, whether it is bilateral level, whether it's going to be multilateral level. That has to be decided by the countries here. Economic disparity. Now, this is perhaps where the real issue comes in. Let's say we want to keep a fund, we want to keep something that has to be for the whole global south, we want to create institutions. Now the first question comes in is who will contribute and what would be the contribution. Now each one would say that this is my capability, I will not be able to contribute beyond. So how do we come up with mechanisms that will make sure that the economic disparity that are already existing, which are organic, how do we take care of those? And then political instability. This is another major concern. Something is done by one political leadership. By the time we have regime change, we have some other political party coming in, they may have an absolute different opinion. If one government, perhaps in the global south, in one of the countries, has, let's say it has an issue with the global powers getting involved there, or they don't want some of them to come in, they're resisting, maybe the next one which comes may robustly engage with. We have seen this happening in Sri Lanka, we have seen this happening in Bangladesh, we have seen this happening in Myanmar, we have seen in so many countries this has become a major case of concern which also has to be taken. Lack of infrastructure, we are still struggling with. Without these, how much ever we talk about, there is no possibility. But over a period of time, at least in the last 1 decade, we are able to see a lot of connectivity component, many other things are taken care of, but that does not mean that it has resolved to an extent where countries are able to have the ease of doing business to many other things. Health challenges, we were all exposed, including the developed countries, that's a different issue, but how much as a global south we could help each other. And we were all exposed during COVID-19. There are other health hazards that continue to exist which can be a major case of concern. All of us are struggling with regard to that. Educational disparities, though there is something called as Anglosphere, not everybody is part of the Anglosphere in the global south as well. Each of them are still, what if the flavor of this century, that is nationalism, takes over, where it also pushes people to take care of their own languages and they push ahead for that one. How do we then integrate? How do we take care of many of those things? Those are also major case of concern. The parity in education is a major case of concern. I already spoke about environmental issues, I'm just skipping that one. There is also debt burden. I'm leaving out the historical and cultural differences most of you would be aware of. Debt burden is also one concern because countries, anything that they want to start as a new initiative, first they would say, I already have a burden of debt that I have taken from different institutions, global institutions. How do I repay? How do I take care of those things? Who will be there to help us out? Without coming out of that one, I'll not be able to make a fresh commitment. Here where perhaps maybe His Excellency is here, I think they have been doing in many countries, including certain African countries. I think Japan would be one major country because we have, that's one perhaps a better alternative that we have among the available. And then the global power dynamics, which partially I mentioned, limited access to technology. This is a major concern in most of the global south nations. India itself was a victim of technological denial for a very, very long time. Then we have come up to where we are today, but that does not mean that the rest of the global south also is been able to do that one, because it has to be inherently there in the population, in their human resources. If it is not there, then the sort of help that is required from elsewhere is also equally important. How do we do? As I said, diplomatic engagement, capacity building, public awareness, some partners and alliances. Some of the strategies, if we look in diplomacy and dialogue, this whole session itself is on diplomacy, so perhaps that's going to be very helpful. Conflict prevention, human rights and rule of law. How much ever we say no to it, at the end of the day, again, there I say, if we talk about declaration of human rights that we've all agreed upon at some point of time, that's also aiding to the rule-based world order. How do we deny that one? Economic development, we have so many forums, education and cultural exchanges, regional cooperation, as I said, from conflict prevention to everything, environmental sustainability, that's a crisis, but it's also an opportunity. Every crisis brings an opportunity in international relations, and perhaps climate change is such type of a crisis that's pulling us together, and global south can come up with its own ways and mechanisms to take care of it. International assistance cooperation, and last but not the least, I think the media itself has to play a very proactive and a peaceful role in not promoting enmity, not doing the things that are detrimental to the global south and between the nations in the global south. They need to play such a role that perhaps we see it as very, very positive and we take it forward. I think I've passed the time that was given to me. Just to conclude, establishing and maintaining a rule-based international order in the Indo-Pacific, more specifically referring to the global south, requires sustained efforts, collaboration and diplomatic initiatives. Now, by addressing key elements and challenges, regional actors can actually contribute to stability, security and prosperity, and that would be the larger Indo-Pacific to an extent. Initially, we even asked, what is Indo-Pacific? Because US has its own definition, we have our own definition, somebody else has their own definition, but I think This is about the imaginations. At the end of the day, those imaginations, if you look in, we all have a clarity what exactly Indo-Pacific is about. Maybe there, here, a bit of redrawing of the map and other things, largely the mental maps, otherwise we are aware of it. Promoting peace and security between nations in the global south requires comprehensive and collaborative approach. Maybe what India has done as of now is the beginning, and there will be many more to come. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Nandakishore. That was an excellent presentation, and I think it sums up the concerns that the Global South has related to implementation of the rule-based order, which is only one instrument of how these countries would like to talk to each other. I lost my one slide, where you put those 9 squares. That sums it up all again in terms of what are these essentials which are required, the prerequisites that are required if the countries of the Global South have to talk to each other and promote peace and prosperity. Excellent lecture by both the panelists here. We have about 20 minutes, and I know there will be a lot of questions, so I will not come between you and the questions. Questions or you please identify. The rules are very simple. Please ask questions and don't get into a long presentation mode. If you are willing to make a presentation, call you later for giving us a presentation. At the moment, stick to the questions, but also say who it's addressed to. Alright, the mic will be passed around. So we'll take about 3 questions in the first round, and then we'll come to the next round and take another 3 questions. So it's reminding me there's a rule-based order in this. Yeah, there's an answer going up. Please pause the mic. Please identify yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Yamini from the Department of International Relations, Florida College. So both the speakers have spoken about rules-based order and the established treaties. But if there's anything lacking in the system of international law, then that would be the compliance factor. So how, as Global South, can we build a compliance factor so that we can also set the narrative, as it's easier for the Global North to make other countries comply. And the most instruments used as of now is either expulsion from international organizations or sanctions. And we've seen from the Russia-Ukraine conflict that we have found many countries to be immune to such type of instruments. So how can we build our own compliance factor? Thank you.
We'll take 2 more questions, and then we'll request them to answer.
Hello, I'm Professor Sriram Chowdhury of the Jindal School of International Affairs. There was a mention by Dr. Nandakishore of great power, rivalry and involvement in the affairs of the Global South. On this question, I'd like panelists, both of them, to reflect on, is great power rivalry actually beneficial to the Global South in terms of balancing and preventing hegemony? Or is actually great power rivalry harmful to the interests of the Global South? The traditional view expressed by people like Julius Nyerere of Tanzania was that, when the elephants fight, it's the grass that gets trampled, right? But in our region, if you take the Indo-Pacific, the Chinese say that the United States does not belong here and should get out, right? And then there are some smaller countries, but which are facing the heat from the Chinese expansionism. So is it actually beneficial for small and weak and poor countries to actually have this great power rivalry as a balancing factor? Or is it actually harmful so that some of them actually say that they don't want a choice between the US or China. We want to, both of them, we want investment and security from both of them, and we want to get along with both of them. And some of them feel that this new Cold War is bad for them. But others want the US here, and they believe that that's the last stop against total Chinese hegemony and Pax Sinica. So I'd like your views on, is great power rivalry good for the Global South? Or maybe we can't generalize, but is it good for Global South in Indo-Pacific at least?
One more question.
Morning, sir. Dr. Sridhar Krishnaswamy actually spoken about the Indo-Pacific recognition as Asia-Pacific. So my question is very simple. As India, where do we face challenge towards recognition as a lead in global south, in midst of loss of sense of proportionality, and again the recognition as an Indo-Pacific rather being recognized as Asia-Pacific?
Yeah, I'll request both the panelists to respond. First, Dr. Sridhar Krishnaswamy, and then.
Excellent questions, all three of you. Let me take the second one first. Is it good if we have great power rivalry? It's going back to what Julius Nyerere said. When two elephants fight, it's the grass that gets hurt. I don't think great power rivalry of today is much different than what it was in the Cold War either. What's that, sir? Yeah, definitely. Because then it comes to the question of compliance. That's what somebody asked. The great power rivalry, as it recently, thought of when you talk about the Ukraine. But Ukraine, that is not a rivalry as such. Ukraine was, in my view, it was as a refusal to address somebody else's concern. For the last 20 years, ever since Putin has been in power, he's been telling the West, especially the United States and Europe, I don't care about the expansion of NATO, but only keep my security interests in mind. 1962, the Americans objected to the Russians placing missiles in Cuba, saying that it was America's backyard. Now you think Putin will keep quiet if you put missiles in his front yard? You see, this is again, total lack of understanding, ignorance, arrogance. This is what current great power rivalry is playing out to be. It was no longer as a kind of what you call ideological divide as what we witnessed during the Cold War era. Now, to talk about what the global South can do for compliance, I would say precious little. Because as what Commodore was saying in her remarks, what are we going to do compliance? Are we going to put the blue helmets there? Nobody, even the UN would not want to get involved in these things. Take the South China Seas, for example. Even this morning, I read it in the papers that Philippines has summoned the Chinese ambassador, because they want to talk. Why are you, marshalling ships? First of all, you have to understand there are 6 nations in the global South, contesting amongst themselves. See, there's another factor that the global South has to, keep in mind. The competition within. The competition, within. So, compliance, we can only, talk to people, ask them to follow treaties that each one of them have signed, as what Commodore Watson said, UNCLOS, United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea. China is a signatory. Still, it says that my territorial limit is from my shore 2,000 miles. Where everybody accepts only a 12-mile limit or a 3-mile limit, he says mine is 1,000 miles. So that means he doesn't, China does not recognize the what you call the common heritage or in a territorial limit. They don't care. So if you want, you come and challenge me. That's the kind of attitude. For that, we can only talk to them, reason with them. And believe me, the Chinese are not exactly looking for a confrontation. At least not now, in the current state of their economic troubles. So we need to. I'll give the mic.
Thank you. Probably on the legal complaints, let's start off with. At times, there's no compulsion to force someone to do that one, but also there's other way that can be brought in where certain nations would feel comfort and then they also comply. Let me give a simple example. At the end of the G20, India managed to bring the African Union that consists of 54 countries, and what it did was inclusivity, or what it practiced was inclusivity. Though there might be in long term that India is anticipating, let's say when it goes for UN Security Council or other things, you get directly 54 votes, and there can be many other ways of looking at it. But at the same time, what it made it to feel is that these many days nobody ever thought that African Union was so important. We never made ourselves to be there. But India made sure that it does something like this, and then perhaps say first you give them an opportunity and then ask them to comply with certain things. So I see that as a very positive way of looking at things, and inclusivity has done that magic, and over a period of time that inclusivity and empowerment will certainly will bring some amount, because not everybody want to behave like China, or everybody has the capacity to be like them and then keep violating all the time. That's the first component. I think Professor Cholia's question is pertinent. I think he just reflected the dilemma that a lot of countries in the global south are going through, and it's valid as well, because they are always torn between, because as global south, let's say we sit, talk, do all those things. As I mentioned, one of the major issues is finances, the crunch of finances that are not available with the people or with the countries there, and then if somebody has to help them out, they still have to look up to some of these major parts. But at the same time, I think there is something that we do as a regular exercise, something called as the threat perception matrix. When we do threat perception matrix, even this is something that is there in Kautilya's mandala as well, as you progress and as you start achieving certain stature in international politics and as you start prospering, your level of threat perception changes, and someone else's threat perception towards you also changes. There where we were able to look at the immediate, short term, medium term and long term. In long term, we looked at even the United States as a threat, because US would not like India. As of now, they are seeing us as a linchpin to fight against the Chinese or to resist the Chinese or contain the Chinese, whichever way we want to call it as. But over a period of time, if India starts taking lot of leadership initiative, if India starts coming in the forefront, India becomes too prosperous, I think the US will not be able to handle that. When US will see that as a threat, because it will bring down its stature. Because the way there were some who were telling the decline of the US as a global power, there were others who were saying others are catching up. The US has stayed there and it has been continuing to be there. Others are catching up, but still the larger discourse is the US is declining, and that I think that discourse hurts even someone like United States or China or any matter. I think there were professors or senior professors' statement is very profound. I don't know how many of you could hear in the back. He said not just during the fight between the elephants, even when they are making love, the grass gets hurt. I think that's a very, very important statement, because we tend to think only the rivalry part, but at the same time even the cooperation can be too extracting. It can be sucking out everything from here. The idea is to promote everyone, or the idea is to bring that individuality. It is from that perspective. But yes, are we ready in the global south to completely denounce them and then take it forward? Certainly not. I think we still require that hand-holding. We still are looking up to them only. We are, from technology to everything, we are still looking up to them. But perhaps there is some point of time, they also have to realize that how much they can meddle with, how much they can interfere in day-to-day business of a lot of countries. If Bangladesh is having an election, the US need not have an opinion and continuously keep bombarding them saying that this is not right, that is not right. They need to set their own house right, because long ago they thought the electoral college is so important because people weren't that educated. Now they have an educated civil society, yet they are not allowing. what do you say, the public opinion to be there, and yet they're trying to put down the public opinion, the way it happened to Al Gore, the way it happened to Mrs. Clinton. So there are so many other things that perhaps they themselves can take care of. They need not interfere in a lot of things of the global south, and that's the perspective. Otherwise, his what is a question is an essential dilemma that every country in the global south is going through today, and it will be going through for decades to come. There is no doubt about it. But looking at an alternative, what we are talking about today, is also equally important. That's the dilemma that Japan has gone through. After subletting its security to the United States, now it is seeing that in a time of crisis between Japan and China, United States may actually not interfere, may not be of help. That's why they're looking for others. We also happen to have a dialogue on India-Japan, where the former speechwriter of one of a great friend of this country, Shinzo Abe, he was mentioning that only. We need to look at alternatives. We need to make new friends. We need to take care of our security. I think that survival and that self-help is becoming primordial. I think that's the way. We still should not be too dependent on the great powers, or we should not be too dependent on already those who have reached that status. That's my submission. Thank you.
I think there have been excellent responses to the questions which are posed, which are all very relevant, particularly about the power play. It's inevitable. And like Professor Sundaran brought out, whether they are fighting or whether they are together, it's a global south that will be affected. Right now we are going through that phase where there is some efforts for rapprochement between US and China. And therefore, some of the long-term plans that you invested in, whether it's the RSCI, IPEF, IPOI, would it be affected? To what extent would it be affected? How would India suffer? These are things that I'm sure the policy planners are looking at. There's one point which was made by my postgrad friend. He said, should it be Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific? It really doesn't matter what they call her, what China wants to call her, what does not want to admit. The point is that India has already a pole position now in terms of being the leader of the global south. So whether China acknowledges Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific has little relevance. Our own Sridhar, who is here, our strategist in Chennai Center for China Studies, does not call South China Sea as South China Sea. He always makes it a point to call it as Indo-China Sea, the term that was used many years ago to refer to South China Sea. Therefore, but would it make a difference to China? It would not. So let's India not worry about which zone we are. We know we are in India Pacific. We are also part of the Asia Pacific. Let's work on both arena to improve our work and ensure that there's time for just one more question if there's any. If there are no questions, then we can MC can take over and there's one question. Please go ahead. There's a last question. Please identify and also indicate who your question is addressed to.
Sir, my name is Ramachandran. So
Hold it closer.
I'm sorry. My name is Ramachandran. I'm working as a software engineer and also a UPSC aspirant. So my question is, does the countries of global south want India to lead this front? Because I have seen in the BRICS summit that even the BRICS countries are giving top presidents to the Chinese president. We are trying to get that spot, or the countries are making us to move to that spot? I just have this question.
I think there will be a set of countries who would be indifferent to everything that happens in the world. They live in their own zone, there is no doubt about it. But I think this is that appetite and hunger that some of them will be at least having. Why should India be doing all this? Why should India be taking this leadership? Because it has an aspiration. That's how we look at national interest itself. National interest is divided into three components. That depends on how a country looks at it. There is something called as an aspirational interest, there is an operational interest, and there is a polemic. Like India has an aspiration to be somewhere. For that, it is trying to operationalize through whatever resources that we have. When we don't have resources, we are reaching out to someone else. And whenever we are doing, there has to be a narrative to that one. That is how I think the Minister for External Affairs is able to tell that Europe's problem is not everyone's problem. We are also able to tell them on face. It has taken 70 years for us to tell them on face, saying that don't preach me morality. When what I buy for a whole month, you buy it in an afternoon. So don't tell, at least even to come to that one. I think we are clear about our national interests, we are clear about where are we heading to, and our aspirational component is driving us. I think that's the drive that has to push most of the countries in the global south. I'm sure not everybody is capable of being leader, not everybody is capable of taking leadership positions, but at least they can be joining with others and then sound like a team rather than solo going there and trying to do something like that. And that's something that we are able to build. And that was exactly the topic that was given to me, how this consciousness has to come in. What are the mechanisms through which the consciousness has to be built? Why should there be so much about? Had India wanted to have the G20 in Delhi and just deliberate in and around, after a few months and everything would be done, and then it would have been just away from here. Why did India take so much of pain to bring so many different angles to G20, from the youth to the university connect to so many things? Right? Perhaps it has not happened anywhere at all, because that's where India wants the whole of India to celebrate this one. I think that's the same aspiration that India has as a leader of the global south. It wants to do that or it wants it to be percolated to the rest of the south. I think that's precisely the drive here, because there will be some who will always be indifferent, or they may even speak against you, like the way Pakistan did to us when the South Asian satellite came. They said this is for intelligence and reconnaissance, and India wants to use this one for some other purpose. But there were others who made use of it, and they're in a better position now. So it depends on their own drive and their own interest. I think that's the perhaps the closest that I think of as an answer, though there is no absolute answer to the question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think with that we come to the end of this first session, which has gone on very well, sir. If we finish this session, you can postpone your question to the next one. All right, sir. After this, can we do it after this? Yeah, we'll do it after this, sir, because this session is over. So I do not want to overstep this session. So all that remains for me is to request you all to join me in applauding the excellent efforts of both of them.
Thank you, sirs, for talking about the diversity inherent in the Global South terminology and for giving us a rigorous discussion of the concepts of rule-based order. I would like to thank the chair and the speakers for the constructive and enriching presentations. I thank the Commodore for having moderated this session so efficiently. I thank the members in the audience and the speakers for the lively Q&A session. Now, I request Commodore R.S. Vasan, Director General, to felicitate the speakers. Mr. Sridhar Krishna Swami, sir. Felicitate Dr. Nandakishore sir also.